Hi, I'm Ed. Welcome to Common Sense.
And I'm John. How you doing, Ed?
I'm good, John. How about you?
Doing really well. So today we're going to tackle another age-old question. Last time we talked about in-house versus outsourcing, and now we'll tie it together with budget. So, the question is, how much should you spend on your marketing budget? And the obvious answer is it depends. So we're not going to leave it at that. We'll try to address some of the more common scenarios and reasons why companies do and don't budget for marketing. So why don't we start with an industrial manufacturing company that you're so familiar with? What's a reasonable marketing budget for revenue growth?
Well, I guess my first question is, how are we going to argue about this? One of us isn't going to say nothing and the other a ton. So it's going to be more discussion of grade rather than yes or no. Although it's interesting, so many companies almost wonder whether they should spend anything. But, when we talk about marketing budget, I guess first we got to define what it is. And I'd say for sake of this argument, we're talking staff, dedicated internal staff and freelancers, and website development and support, and digital ads, AdWords, print ads, PR, promotions, trade shows, content creation, video, the MarTech stack, all that kind of stuff bundled together. According to the SBA, which offers some general guidelines for small and medium-sized businesses, established companies ought to be spending somewhere around 6 to 12% of revenues on marketing. Now, if you're a startup, it's probably going to be more than that. Even though you don't have any money, you're going to have to spend more in order to try to get going. On the other hand, some sources will tell you a rule of thumb. If you ask your accountant, they're probably going to push the number way down, maybe 2 to 5%, depending on your size and profit margin. But then you look at certain industries. In the software industry, the amount of money that's spent on marketing is enormous because the incremental cost of each new customer is quite low and the potential revenue is quite high. Right. So if we just kind of pick the wag somewhere in the middle and say conservatively call it 5%, for a typical middle market manufacturer, that's an easy calculation. Then if you're a $10 million company, so it's kind of right at the very bottom of lower middle market, that would be $500,000 a year on marketing. If you're doing $100 million of sales, that means $5 million a year on marketing. And in traditional industries where, companies are accustomed to thinking of their marketing budget in terms of some small number of trade shows per year and some trade journal ads, that's baked into many budgets that people just kind of incrementally adjust every year, which often aren't anywhere near that 5% number. So does this sound familiar to what you've seen, or does any of it surprise you?
No, absolutely not. It's very typical, and I've seen those numbers. And what surprises me is just how few companies actually budget even that much, even $500,000 for marketing.
Right.
And I think we can contribute that gap in spending to a few important things. First of all, and we've discussed this a lot, budget deciders don't really understand the value of marketing. In other words, what's the relationship between $1 spent on marketing and $1 made in sales? So there's just a lot of confusion about that. And then you can really look at the source too. You can lay some of that at the feet of marketers that are failing to deploy the budget in a way that really drives revenues. And they're not communicating the results, the right meaningful results tied to goals that right. Executives want to achieve. So those two things really cause it to fail. And then I think you can also go to sort of an old school way of thinking about digital marketing, or even failing to understand the benefit of it. We've never had to spend that much before on digital marketing. And usually, as you mentioned, our budget goes to other things.
Or people in our industry don't use the internet. That's another great one.
Well, yeah, but that's where all the customers are. So we're really missing the boat there. And the truth is, from what I've seen, digital marketing can really enhance sales productivity as well as generating qualified leads, which also saves time in the sales process. So what are your, in your experience, what are some examples of that's really worked or maybe not worked?
So by definition, and this is a little bit self-serving, but my clients are not necessarily representative. These are people that have realized they need to begin doing some of these kinds of things. But in many cases, companies aren't really invested emotionally or intellectually, or certainly in terms of resources, in digital marketing. Inbound content marketing with conversion optimized websites are rare among typical middle market industrial companies. They're still pushing out data sheets and information. Targeted paid media advertising, even retargeting and personalized email campaigns, those are relatively infrequent. I mean, the number of companies I talk to that have latent databases of 50,000 contacts that don't send any emails because we're not going to spam people. I mean, it's crazy to waste that opportunity. Account-based, and of course, I would never advocate somebody spam somebody, but sharing positive, worthwhile information, that's less spam. That's productive for everyone. Account-based marketing, where sales reps and marketers can work together to plan strategic target account strategies and attract and engage buying teams from within those target accounts. I mean, that's stuff that's enabled. We've talked about ABM and talked about the MarTech stack. I mean, companies just aren't doing that. They're missing a huge opportunity. There's some interesting cases where I've seen marketing departments work closely with channel partners, driving really great mutual success with co-branding and co-marketing and leveraging the manufacturer's investment in marketing automation. But there's precious few companies doing that. So, as you've come at it, as we talked last week, from the agency perspective, like we talked about in the last session, from an agency view, as you go in and talk to companies, what have you traditionally suggested in terms of allocation for budget for marketing?
Well, I think it's really crucial to understand what it takes to get this stuff done. And it's not just people, it's not just technology. So let's explore that a little bit. First of all, you do need talent. You do need good people. You do need specialists at various things to do the various tasks that are involved in creating campaigns and ABM and all the things that you mentioned. So at a minimum, you're going to need a strategist, maybe first and foremost, someone who really knows your business, but also knows your customers and knows how to reach them and attract them. You're going to need some kind of writer or brand journalist. Maybe you already have someone doing that, but they're usually assigned to things like brochures and company documents and things like that. But you're going to need that person to be able to work on marketing. You're going to need a graphic designer, a web design and development expert, someone who's familiar with marketing technology, some sort of hybrid data scientist and analyst. Because once you start collecting all that data, you've got to understand what it means and do something useful with it. And then maybe last but not least, you need someone to liaise with the sales department, help them understand what the data means, make sure they're using the technology the right way, and make sure that the teams are working together. So those are all specialties that, you could maybe find in one person, but how effective are they going to be doing any of those things? So we're really looking at 5 to 6 professionals on a team. And if you look at just sort of the general cost of hiring people like that, it's going to run you around $500,000 to $600,000 just for the labor. So I mentioned the technology. That's the next thing. You're also going to need a website. You're going to need marketing automation, CRM, analytics, paid media, social media, and so on. So you have a lot of technology, software to drive the various campaigns that you need to get the word out, to get people coming to the website and converting and turning into leads and then nurturing them. So all of that could take, it could cost you at least $100,000 a year in fees. And some of that is overlapped in platforms like HubSpot. So you can save some there, but you got to have the tools. And then to generate leads, they don't just come to your door on their own. So you're going to have to do some advertising, or you're going to have to generate leads through other channels, like your buyer intent data. That's another way of finding qualified leads that are actually in the process of looking for your type of products. So if you add all that up, and that part's probably around a minimum of $200,000 a year, we're knocking on the door of $1 million a year right there. So if you're going to cut that in half, what are you going to cut? Are you going to cut the labor? And, so it's difficult to do unless less of a budget than that. So in my experience, that's one of the main selling points for agencies, because an agency can come to you and offer all of that, except maybe for the paid media budget for, under $20,000 a month. So that's $250,000 plus advertising budget. So let's call it $500,000 all in. So that's about half of what we were talking about for doing it in-house. And, it's up to companies to make that call. Would you rather have the investment in your own people or not? And that's what it boils down to. A lot of agencies are successful because they put that message across in a very detailed way. So, I think ultimately this is where we need to be. Why don't companies pull the trigger on this more often?
Well, it probably goes back to your first point. I mean, thinking about it, really working through the conversations you have with people. If a company defines marketing as the few trade shows a year that we've traditionally done and some magazine ads, maybe a couple bingo cards, I think some companies still do that kind of stuff, then that's your frame of reference for what marketing ought to be in terms of activities and resource allocation, budget, staff, etc. And it's really hard to just arbitrarily change that. It's a much more easy route to say, okay, let's look at last year and add 2 or 3% to it, or maybe we want to do one more show. That kind of a change, as opposed to, no, we're going to completely reshuffle this and do it differently. And CEOs, largely because the marketing people, as you said earlier, have failed in their responsibilities, CEOs don't necessarily visualize the value part of the equation. If they're not getting numbers about customer acquisition cost and lifetime value and ratios between those kinds of numbers, if they just hear this fluff, these vanity metrics of, fortunately we're largely past eyeballs, but visitors and leads. I mean, what's a lead? That's a question that's often not answered. If that's the number they hear, and the CFO is saying, geez, we've got to invest in this capital equipment, and sales wants to add another salesperson in the Midwest, who's going to get the money? It's not going to be marketing. Marketing will remain the redheaded stepchild. The interesting thing is that in many cases, it actually, in order to do this right, and in order to map to the way buyers buy, there's a reallocation. It's not arbitrarily increase the marketing budget. It's taking money from sales, because so much of what happens as part of marketing is part of that continuum that we've talked about, where PR, marketing, sales, and service all blend together. And so field salespeople that have a harder time getting appointments and prospecting actually need more of that marketing stuff done in order to give them the conversations they need to have. So it's, in some cases, it's fighting those silos and the status quo and the turf battles in order to reallocate resources rather than just arbitrarily assign a bunch more. That's part of the reason that consultants and agencies need to get so much better at helping CEOs understand the data that they're making these decisions based on, and CFOs as well. In fact, CFOs, you see increasingly, they're kind of wandering into the CMO territory, I think for precisely that reason. Companies sense that there's information and decisions being made there. They're just trying to figure out how to do it. CEOs and teams absolutely need to get better at understanding their own buying and hiring process so they can compare the costs of building an internal team and doing external. And they need to also be, savvy in how they evaluate. Like the scenario you outlined with an agency makes complete sense, but they're still going to have a couple people in-house to work on that with the agency. So it's not an exact, kind of plug and play alternative. They have to understand some of the other costs that they incur. But at some point, it comes down to big people making big decisions, and the CEO has to be able to make some choices, and it's going to upset the apple cart. Sales and marketing executives that have been fighting each other for budget and kind of hunkering down in their bunkers and lobbing grenades at each other and saying, oh, well, they're not getting it done, they're not generating leads, we're the rainmakers. There's going to have to be somebody that blows it up and says, no, we're going to do it differently. And of course, it doesn't have to be blown up. It can be incrementally changed, but there's got to be a big mindset change, I think. All right, so I'm ranting. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you nailed it. And the apple cart definitely needs to be flipped on its head for most companies that at least haven't grown up in the digital world, or at least haven't identified all the disruption that's going on in their industry. They're just got their blinders on. They're not recognizing that new buyers are out there online, 80% of the buyer journey. So they're not out there. They're not committing to this process. And that's why they're reluctant to put budget behind it. So
Right.
it's going to take some kind of, epiphany for a lot of these guys to wake up. And that's really why you and I have been working on a book for the past 8 months or so. That's going to come out soon. And it's called Common Sense Revenue Growth. And we're going to address this topic in a lot of detail to really drill down and see what CEOs and other executives need to do to get by this problem, to embrace it even and move forward and become the leader in the industry because they're digital.
Right.
So anyway, there's a lot to think about there, and a lot of change, as you mentioned. It's not just budgeting. It could be organizational change. It could be culture change. Those things are all very tightly related. So we believe you have to look at them all in order to make progress.
And that's why we call it common sense. We think it's a common sense approach and really bridging the kind of theoretical strategy kind of stuff and the really detailed tactical stuff that leaves this whole gap in the middle of how does it actually impact a business and how do we do it and how do we plan for it and how do we execute it. So thanks for joining us today. Next time, we're actually going to drill down into a slightly different angle, the difference between sales process and sales methodology. Is there one? If there is, what is it? What does it mean? How organizations react to it? So I'm looking forward to that. In the meantime, thanks for joining us on Common Sense. I'm Ed.
And I'm John. See you next time.